Welcome to Tikvah Radio Show, the sound of hope. I'm Liliana Inez, your host. Someone once said that God speaks to people in different ways. Did you ever have dreams, visions, or a special experience in which you felt God was speaking to you? The Torah tells us that Abraham, Jacob, and many others heard and experienced God. Does Adonai speak to people like that nowadays? On Tikvah Radio, we interview people who have had an encounter with the God of Israel, a special experience. Some have even had personal miracles, and all have found the Messiah of Israel. Stay tuned to Tikvah Radio Show and hear an amazing story of someone who was encountered by God. Welcome, Mishpacha. We're so glad that you joined us. Today, our guest is Steve Karos. Welcome to Tikvah Radio Show, Steve. We're so glad to have you here with us.
And I'm glad to be here.
All right. So, Steve, you were born in Paris, France. That sounds really interesting. Tell us what your childhood was like.
Well, being born in Paris, France was simply because my father was stationed there in the Korean War. He had been lifelong Navy officer through World War II and the Korean War. So my heritage is strictly American, but we were over there when I was born.
Uh-huh.
And then we came back. I had an older brother. We came back to the States for 3 years after I was born. And shortly after that, my father retired from the military and took a position out in California with North American Aviation, which was quite a prominent growing company, and that's how I ended up in Southern California.
Cool. So before Southern California, were you in another state, or were you still over in France? Or
Well, we finished out his service in Bethesda, Maryland, Washington, D.C. He was in U.S. Navy intelligence there. And he was recruited out to California to do the same kinds of things for North American Aviation space programs.
All right. Sounds like a really interesting job he had.
It was exciting for me because I got to meet test pilots and all that kind of stuff that, kids go crazy for, the glossy photographs, autograph photographs, and all that sort of thing. It was pretty exciting.
So you said in your bio that in your earlier childhood, you were in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. Can you share about that?
Yes, it was the neighborhood we ended up moving to out in Southern California, and probably 2/3 of the neighbors were Jewish families, and they did things that were unusual to me because I was not aware I was Jewish at the time. And so I was a regular kid going to an evangelical church, and my schoolmates and friends here in this neighborhood were Jewish, and I saw them celebrating the holidays and that sort of thing. It was very unique to me, very different. But probably my most profound memory was right across the street. The family had the grandmother who just sat in the house all day in a dark room, and every once in a while she would wander off, and we kids would go out and find her and walk her home. And the thing that I remember is guiding that woman by the arm to see the numbers tattooed on her forearm. I'll never forget it.
So she spent her days in a dark room?
Yes, because having gone through the camps, she pretty much lost her senses or lost her mind. And so she I guess you would say she had dementia, and just was very quiet and kept to herself in that room. It was very sad.
Wow. So she would wander off and you guys would help her out. As a child, how did you feel about this lady, and did you understand what she had gone through?
I understood probably more than most kids my age because my dad was in World War II, and he talked to us a lot about not necessarily his own experiences. He ended up doing that later. He kept those to himself. But he talked about the overall situation of the war and what went on all around the world. He taught us about India and China and all these places where he ended up being after the war. But he also explained what had happened with the Holocaust and those kinds of things. So I had probably a little bit more understanding, and so I knew exactly what it was all about. Of course, you can only comprehend so much when you're, 6 or 7 or 8, as I was at the time. But I knew that she had been there, and she was a classic example of how horrible it had to have been. So that was a launching point for me, and I still kind of tear up thinking about it.
Wow. In a way, it was a privilege for you to meet somebody like that. Not a lot of people get a chance to do that. And your dad was really wise in teaching you about the wars and the different situations that were going on in the 40s and the 50s, because I think a lot of parents didn't talk about that kind of stuff, in the home.
Right, and he and my mom both would talk to my brother and me, and as we grew, we would sit around the table and discuss politics and all kinds of things. I had a pretty good childhood there in a lot of ways, and that was one of them. That's
great. So anything else that you want to share as you were growing up that you find interesting now? So your dad was Jewish, but you didn't know about it, so you were raised evangelical. Does that mean that your mom was not Jewish, or she wanted you to be, raised a certain way?
Right. My mom was not Jewish, and when she and my father got married, she had insisted or put forth that we would be taken to the church she was raised in. Now, my father, although he was Jewish, he had been raised in the Catholic Church. And as it was explained to me a little later, that was apparently done for protection back in the old country of Greece. Apparently there were problems, and so they found protection, I guess, in the Catholic Church is how it was explained to me.
I think that's true for a lot of countries that kind of thing was done. There's a lot of Sephardim that converted to Catholicism in order to protect their families. And so,
right.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot.
My mom followed through, and she was taking us to church every Sunday. And so, from the time I can remember, I knew who God was, who Jesus was, and all of that. And then somewhere in there, we were moved by my dad down to the beach, which would change my life forever. Because of the different choices that would end up generating for career and all that sort of thing. But while we're down there, we were going to a different church, but they're the same denomination. And when I was 12 years old, we had a professor from Pepperdine come in and speak for 4 Sundays. I remember it was 4 all those years ago. That was 1965. And the topic was on creation. And I was so impressed with what he was discussing and showing and proving that all of a sudden in my mind and heart everything came together that I needed to do what I'd heard many Sundays growing up, that you need to give your heart to the Lord. And so I answered an altar call and did just that at 12 years old back in 1965.
Wow, that's great. So how did your life change after you received Yeshua Jesus?
Well, the thing of it is, if people are younger today that have accepted the Lord at an age of 12 or right before your teen years, you would know that going into school and all that as a Christian can be a lot tougher. Back then, it wasn't all that uncommon to have same-age friends who were in church with you as well as your school and all that. So it was pretty comfortable. I wasn't necessarily too challenged at being a Christian, although society changed dramatically in the late 60s and the drug culture hit and all that. And I relied on my Christian faith, although it was a level of a teenager, but it was there, as well as sports to get me around and through the challenges that I was seeing all around me.
Wow, that's good. So you feel that was a help for you to keep you on a good road?
Well, absolutely. And as it was it was bad for a little while, and then got a little better right around 70, 71, and then it got real bad again. And it's been bad, in my opinion, ever since. And I'm referring to the drug cultures and the rebellious nature of younger people. And so I was faced, with all those challenges in college, but made it through. I married young, and my wife and I continued our church going and that sort of thing. So, but the beach was a great place to grow up. It was a bubble, and one of the neatest things that ever happened to me is I ended up wanting to become a police officer and did so right there at the beach cities, and had a wonderful time doing that.
That's great. So as far as your teen years and everything, everything went really well, and you didn't have any unusual things happen. Did you ever have any interesting experiences with God during that time?
It's interesting. My relationship with God was such that, and I guess I learned this from maybe one of my teachers or one of the pastors or something, but I just learned that I could talk to God and should talk to God every day, and I got really comfortable with that. And when I mentioned getting married, I was married for about 6.5 years when I lost my first wife to cancer. And it was interesting because her father was actually a minister. And as I was going through this, he couldn't cope. And I didn't understand it because I was doing a better job coping, although I'm not saying it wasn't terribly hard, which it was. But I think it was because I was able to talk to God every day, in fact, all day long in that dark time. And I really feel like he put his hand on me in those days to get me through. And with that, all the way to today, from time to time, I'm introduced to men who have found out that their wives are terminally ill or have lost their wives, and I've been able to sit with them and share with them and help them understand some of the things they're going through and some do's and don'ts and things like that. Almost like a ministry.
Well, it sounds like a ministry. It sounds really good. That's really important, I think, too, that overall women are more conversational. They'll find their friends and stuff to share with, and they might have a better support system, or it might be easier for them. I think it's sometimes more challenging for men when they go through a difficult time. So it sounds like a really important thing that you have that you can share.
And it is, and I actually have gone and talked to people with another friend of mine who I was introduced to who had lost his wife. And he and I sort of became partners in it for a while there. Unfortunately, it happens all too frequently. And and it's a tough deal on a younger man especially. So yeah, I've had the privilege of being able to share God's love in a person like that's world, because it's a world that's come crashing down. And the one thing, you just don't have the ability often to see that it will get better and it will stabilize, and that God is nearby.
I know that we have more to talk about, but just briefly, if that's possible, there might be somebody listening that has gone through that experience, or maybe is going through it right now. And one of the things that the key thing that you're saying is that you learn to talk to God daily, and to be able to have a fellowship, relationship with Him, and that has been what really sustained you through that really difficult time. So, is there a couple of key things that you feel you want to share that really helped you through that hard time that you might want to share right now?
Sure. First of all, regarding what I'm referring to as my daily prayer and talking with God, when I was raised up, the particular church I was raised in, I've since found a better place for me in the Calvary Chapel movement, but that particular church was more formal, and our prayer life and how we prayed and how we were taught to pray was very formal. And it was, into my teen and years and 20s that I began to realize that we can just talk to God, and it works out better when we just talk to God. And to this day, sometimes I actually sit there with a cup of coffee as if we're having a conversation like you and I are right now. And I feel that He hears me, and I will definitely say that during my police career, there were very many times, or at least a few times, where I know He spoke to me and diverted me from people who wanted to kill me. There were 6 times that happened, actually. Wow. But let me, if you want to talk about that more in a second, fine. But let me get back to the question about, what about losing your wife, you're a young man, or even not so young, or you've lost your wife, and what's some of the best recommendations we've come up with in that situation? And first of all, I like to reach out and tell people that are going through that they should recognize the hurt that they're feeling is a manifestation of love, especially the love they have for that person, that spouse. And so it's there, and it is telling you that you love them. If you didn't love them, you wouldn't hurt nearly so bad. So it's an affirmation of that. And then the second thing is that the love that we have for our spouse can't even come close to the love that God has for us. And Jesus is there, and he knows. And Jesus doesn't heal the hurt and heartache of a loss altogether quickly, because that's not what it's meant to do. It has to be there. But it does get healed, and it does get softer. But it is a process, and we go through it. There's no other way. And if we can embrace that and understand, we wouldn't want it to be any other way. So, and then I tell folks that are going through that, there's so much emotion and such a whirlwind that goes through the heart and mind, that we should never make any big decisions until at least, I'd say, a year. I've seen too many gentlemen, they'll make a decision to sell their house or move to another place, or do finance decisions, or even start a new relationship too fast. Starting a new relationship is not wrong. The Bible clearly tells us that that's okay when we lose our spouse, but it's not something to jump right into. So I say live as it is and keep the big decisions and all those things for a little ways down the future when we're past some of the emotion and able to make good, wise decisions in prayer and maybe with some counseling. So those are just a few of the main things we talked about.
That's good. So thank you for sharing that, Steve. I wanted to go back now, talking about your journey. And so you were raised in church, and you came to receive Messiah when you were 12. And then as you came into adulthood, you learned something interesting, and you shared about that earlier. And that apparently changed your life. You learned about your Jewish heritage. Can you share with us about that?
Sure. As I was going along, I began to become interested in Bible teaching, and I was leading Bible studies and doing different ministries and services in the church and going along without a thought. And then my dad passed away. And after he passed away, somebody had suggested that my father was Jewish, and I looked into it. And I didn't get a lot of information, but I found that our family on my father's side was Jewish. And they had been in Spain, were Sephardic Jewish from Spain, pardon me. And apparently in the late 1400s, they were driven out. And they ended up going to Greece and Bulgaria. And somewhere along the line, they put an S on the end of our name, and I only have my suspicions that was done to make our name not look quite as Jewish, but it was Caro, like the Rabbi Joseph Caro, who wrote Shulchan Aruch. And so then I began to find steamship records and things like that where all of these people began to immigrate to the state of New York from Greece and Bulgaria via Ellis Island. And many Karoses are back there, and very obviously Jewish and so forth. And I discovered this, and I was stunned and intrigued. And another person suggested that to find out more about this stuff, that I try a Jewish congregation and see what it was all about. And the person suggested the congregation Kehilat Ariel in San Diego would be a really good one, which it is. And so we were driving down there from Orange County every Saturday for Shabbat services, and we were learning all about the Jewish roots and Jewish heritage. And I made a decision to sort of immerse myself in what I would describe as somewhat Orthodox. I wore the tzitzit and kippah and really got into that. And I was doing it not for legalistic purposes, but to learn. And I learned quite well through that, and also began to interact with non-Messianic Jewish people, and having conversations, interesting conversations. One of them may be of interest to people, because there's a lot of people that say, well, your mom has to be Jewish to be Jewish. Or some people will say, well, what makes a Jew a Jew? And I looked at that, and in fact, I was in kind of a debate with an Orthodox Jewish man about that. And finally I said to him, I think what makes a Jew is if Hitler would have thrown you in the boxcars. And he looked at me, didn't say another word, he nodded, and then walked away. I found that very interesting, but I think it's true. And I think had my family been unfortunate enough to be still in Europe, we would have had a problem.
Yeah. I'm sure you would have. Definitely.
But having said that, I had some very interesting experiences. I ended up actually living in conservative synagogue for a while. The rabbi and I were very close friends. As I mentioned earlier, I was a police officer, and I oversaw the chaplain program at the police department there. And I had a chaplain who was a Catholic priest. I had a chaplain who was an evangelical pastor. And I got this rabbi friend of mine to become a chaplain. And it made for, the great priest, pastor, rabbi jokes, which the rabbi loved to tell. But we got really close. And there came a time when I ended up losing my second wife. And I was out in Arizona at the time, and I came back, and the rabbi invited me to live in a little apartment in the basement of the synagogue, and in exchange for me doing a few things around the synagogue. And one of the things I did was I made the kitchen kosher for Passover, which I always was amused. I think the rabbi was amused too, that he knew I was Messianic. And so he had this Messianic Jewish friend of his making cleaning for kosher the kitchen. So that was fun. One of our little secrets. I think it was really splendid that he kept that secret, because the board of directors would have never let me stay there if they'd known I was Messianic. I had one experience I'll share with you. I used to go to Torah studies on Tuesday nights. And nobody knew what my background was, but I loved learning about Torah, especially from the Jewish perspectives and with what they call Talmudic wisdom and all that. And one Tuesday night we had a guest rabbi come in, and we were talking around the table. And one of the ladies said, "I have a real problem, Rabbi." And he said, "What's that?" And she says, "Well, my next door neighbors are Christians, and they kind of do what we're doing here in their living room. And I hear them singing and playing guitar, and they're so warm and friendly with each other. And I just struggle with that. Why aren't we more like that?" And the rabbi said, I've noticed Christians can be like that too, and I think we should try to be more like that. And I almost burst out laughing, but again, I couldn't say anything under the circumstance, but I found that a very interesting exchange.
That's neat. They could see something was different about them, and they're hungry for that. That's great. So how did that develop for you? You're learning how to be Jewish, really, in a sense.
Well, what happened was I did a pretty good job of learning how to be Jewish, and then like I said, I lived a pretty Orthodox lifestyle, and then I felt, and this was around 2003, I felt that the Lord was calling me back to Calvary Chapel, and for the purpose of sharing what I learned. And so I did exactly that, and I don't live the Orthodox lifestyle so much anymore. I do keep what I call biblical kosher, and I'm careful on how I conduct myself in case a Jewish person is watching, and I may get an opportunity to talk to them. But essentially, I've been given a lot of opportunities at Calvary Chapel and with other churches to do teaching. I teach on the Jewish culture, foundations, and Scripture. I try to take those black and white words and bring them out in living color, and that's very important, because most people look through westernized eyes who are Christians, and they look at the Bible from their own culture. And I'll give you an example. In our Western culture, the way we bury people is by laying them down in a grave. And in the old biblical culture, they were put in tombs. And so when we baptized in the Messianic congregation, the rabbi explained that he would walk the person being baptized through the water, down and up, symbolizing coming out of the tomb, and also symbolizing crossing the Jordan and all that. And I thought that's pretty neat, and I realized the symbolism really speaks to us through Scripture, and then we start realizing when a simple verse like when Peter and John ran to the tomb, it says that John got there first and he stooped down to look in. Well, now we know that the tombs had just small openings low to the ground, and that would have been covered by the stone. If you've been to the Garden Tomb, which I firmly believe is actually the correct tomb, the door is much bigger, but I believe that was done by a combination of erosion, and they bricked it up a little bit so it's safe, and to allow people to safely walk in and out there. But the idea, though, is that I'm trying to expound on is that when a person gets baptized here, they're done backwards and brought up, just like they're coming out of an American type of a grave rather than a tomb. So if we can get into that, and then we can get really deep with that. There's a lot of interesting stuff. So,
well, that's interesting.
Bring that forward.
Yeah. So you're bringing out, like, the point is that you can read the scriptures, but if you don't understand some of the dynamics, some of the historical facts of how they did things, we don't get the full understanding of what is being explained. And so you probably picked
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the classic examples of that is in Acts chapter 20, I think it starts in verse 7. It talks about the disciples coming together on the first day of the week. And people point to that saying, see, worship time was changed to Sunday. But Jewish believers look at that and we automatically see that we are talking about a Saturday night Havdalah service. And it's quite different than a, quote, Sunday morning church service. And so the point there is we see it clearly. That's a Havdalah service. It started after sundown. Paul preached a long time. He preached unto midnight, but he didn't preach from 10 in the morning to midnight. And that's kind of the idea people have when they read that verse, because they don't understand the Jewish culture behind the Havdalah, which I'll go ahead in case some people don't know. The Havdalah is the going from the blessed day of Shabbat or Sabbath to the first day of the week or the routine day. And it's a service or a get-together that says thank you to God for the Sabbath day and acknowledging its importance. And by the way, one thing I discovered when I was going through those Orthodox days is that at Havdalah services, a lot of the Orthodox services, they recite Isaiah 12, verse 1 through 3, and there's 2 or 3 times in there the name Yeshua, or God is salvation, is listed in the verse. So they actually recite or chant the name Yeshua in there. I believe that's 3444 in the Strongs, if anybody wants to look that up. I get tickled about stuff like that all these people that don't recognize Yeshua yet, I hope, are calling his name out during the Havdalah service. But those are things that go right by people in our evangelical churches, and I think that's what God wants me to share with people.
Well, it's interesting. That's true for the evangelical services, but it's true for our Jewish people that don't recognize Yeshua in the scriptures as well. Would you say that's true as well?
Absolutely, because that was my experience. I didn't know, and I was I misunderstood a number of verses because I didn't get the culture behind it. But I will say this, and I do want to make it very clear that when I was learning the culture and seeing more things in the Scripture, I never have seen one thing that has changed those 5 fundamentals of the faith. So anybody out there, don't worry. If you look into those things and you see verses differently, you will still find the same doctrine. It won't change.
God doesn't change. So, what do you think is the most important thing that you learned connecting with your Jewish roots about Messiah when you went to have that time being an Orthodox? What do you feel God opened your eyes to that's connected with the Messiah and it's connected with your Jewish roots? Is there one area or a special scripture?
I think I can answer that. It's sort of a tough one, but I think I may end up having 2 answers here. One, to really connect. I think what connected for me the best was the Passover, and that the Passover, original Passover, being saved out of Egypt was all part of this tapestry woven that was going to be prophetic to the Messiah. And the thing I learned is that it's right there in front of our face. And Jewish people, they don't read their Bible so much as I thought they did. That was one thing I learned. And they don't often get out of Torah so much either into other areas. But those holidays, those holy feasts, are an absolute picture, prophetic picture of Messiah Jesus. It's right there, and it comes true in the New Testament. And that's when I looked over and I saw a communion table that said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And I realized that when he said that, he wasn't talking about this communion thing with little cups and stuff. He was talking about the Passover Seder. And he was telling his disciples that from now on, we're not going to focus on getting free from Egypt, but we're going to focus on me as the Passover lamb and getting free of our personal Egypts of sin and temptations and all that. I think that was the biggest thing. And I'm sitting here looking at Jewish people that year in and year out, each and every feast and festival points right at Jesus and the Messiah. And so I believe that those of us who see it should pray and look for every opportunity to try to share what they're doing and what it means, if at all possible. I know it's not always easy to have those conversations, but it's an opportunity we should look for. It's right there. And then the other part to that question is, as I learn more about Jewish heritage and lifestyle and foundations in Scripture, I learned more and more about Israel. And in learning about Israel, we're able to see that his promises are true to Israel. We see it right there, coming back in the land and everything that's been going on. And Israel's going to be that final stage. And so I see that. And I'm convinced it's all coming soon, and it's a harbinger that time's short. So I think it's a call for us to share with Jews and Gentiles alike our Jewish Messiah.
Well, I want to talk about what you just said, and I feel the same way. I was doing reading a teaching on the things that need to come in alignment for the Messiah to come. And in Israel, there's a sense that we're right on the edge. A lot of the religious Jewish people, the rabbis, so many key rabbis are now talking about, they sense the Messiah is coming, and it's not too long from now. Of course, there's people trying to see, when is the temple going to be built, and that's definitely has to be something that has to come together before the Messiah comes. And but there's certain things that have to align in order for him to come and some of them are written in the book of Revelation, which probably few Jewish people read. In your words, and it's probably would take another show or more to start talking about all the different things that need to come in alignment. Can you briefly share with us what are the things that you see in this season of the history of man that is lining up with the coming of the Messiah?
Well, that's easy. The book of Revelation, for every time I hear discussion on that, I hear 5 discussions on the book of Ezekiel, particularly chapter 38 and 39. And so we look and we see this prophecy of this invasion. And it's interesting because I've talked with a lot of scholars and I've listened to very prominent scholars, and that's a prophecy that's really hard to pinpoint whether it happens before the rapture or after. And obviously I'm what's described as premillennial and pre-tribulation. And so I believe in that rapture, but I also agree it's hard to pinpoint when this event, this invasion from those countries, particularly the north part, which would be Russia, will take place. But there's no doubt in my mind that whether it's on this side or the other side of the rapture, it's going to be close to the rapture. So that's exciting because this is one prophecy written so many years ago. Ezekiel was a contemporary with Daniel, which was back there 500 BC or so, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a prophecy that is 2,500 years old, and they name names there. We have Persia, which is Iran, and we have Ethiopia, Eritrea, which is called Kush in those days. We have what appears to be Turkey, and some portions of Eastern Europe, as well as Libya. So these are folks that are still in existence, and in some cases, like with Iran and Turkey, they're becoming very contentious. So it's lining up. And so I hear people talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39 5 times as often as Revelation, because it applies more to us, because most of us understand that what goes on in Revelation is going to be after we've been raptured out of here, praise God. So I think that's the one that I would use to answer your question.
Yeah. That is powerful, and we don't have time right now during the interview to be reading that, but I encourage the people that are listening to read Ezekiel 38 and 39 and get some teaching on that as to which countries that is and how they will be coming against Israel. And there's already two lining up, and others not too far from now that will be doing the same. And those are signs that the Messiah is coming. So I believe we're in a really key time in the history of humankind, and that, Steve, I think there's something you wanted to share concerning how things seem to be coming together to confirm the scriptures of Ezekiel 38, 39.
Well, sure. The current events, and we like to look at current events, and I always want to make a reminder: we're not about setting dates. You don't want to ever follow anybody's teaching that's putting a date on anything. But we are told by Jesus to look for the signs of His coming, and we sure are seeing them, especially relative to the Ezekiel 38, 39 invasion against Israel, which, by the way, God interrupts and protects Israel in the prophecy. But what's going on lately, we have Iran moving themselves into Syria, firing rockets and missiles into Israel, Israel responding with air-to-surface attacks. In fact, as I understand, Israel attacked some 50 to 70 sites that they identified as being occupied by Iranian military and destroyed all of them. Just a few days before this all happened, I was actually in Israel, and I was up in the Golan Heights, where you can go. That area was shut down, and you couldn't go up there during this confrontation. But only 2 days after the Israeli Air Force destroyed those sites, they reopened that area of the Golan, knowing through the wonderful Israeli intelligence that it was safe to do so. But and I'm just praising Israel and how they're blessed and with all that great intelligence. But the point here is they had a military conflict with Iran, and Iran is a major player in that invasion. And then just a few days after that, the American embassy was moved to Jerusalem. Some very violent conflicts occurred on the Gaza border, and that generated some pretty crazy comments from the president of Turkey, who called upon all Muslim nations to come against Israel. So these are very lining up with that prophecy of the invasion. We believe that Turkey is named in that prophecy. So that is something to take note of. And I mentioned the word rapture, and I probably was presumptuous thinking people know what that is. But those of us who have the belief that we have called premillennial, pre-tribulational rapture view, that's that great tribulation, the big bad times of 7 years outlined in Revelation. And we believe that Scripture teaches us that the Lord Jesus himself will call his church home to him before all those things happen. And then those left on earth will have to go through a terrible time. Many will be perishing during that time, and it will be difficult at that time to accept Jesus. Not impossible, but very difficult. So it's our call out to people now that time's coming soon, and it's a lot easier now to take a look at this stuff and talk to people and hopefully make a decision that Jesus is truly the Jewish Messiah, and as I recognize him, he is God the Son, and he's coming soon, and it's not something to put off anymore. That it's very important. It's of the utmost importance to seek him out and have a personal relationship by recognizing and believing that he came and he died on a cross for each and every one of our sins. And if we believe in that and accept that, then he takes us to be his own. And I guess that's the bottom line of this entire conversation.
Yes, it is. Thank you for sharing with us, Steve. And we hope you'll be back to share some more of the wonderful insights because of the studies that you did on the Jewish roots.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you today. It's always fun.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
for listening to Tikvah Radio Show, the voice of hope. If you have been blessed by this program and want to join us in sharing with others the hope of Yeshua HaMashiach, a gift of any amount will be appreciated. You can donate and contact us on our website at tikvahradio.com. Once again, that's TIKVAH radio.com. Thank you for joining us, and God bless.